In this section, we're going to look at economic changes and the rise of nationalism and new powers in the world. Strained relations between industrial employers and workers spawned labor movements and new forms of radical politics. Socialism was an ideology developed by radical thinkers who questioned the sanctity of private property and argued in support of industrial workers against their employers. Labor unions were organizations formed by industrial workers to defend their interests in negotiations with employers. The socialist and labor movements were never identical. Most of the time they were allies, occasionally they competed for the support of workers. The growing wealth and power of new industrial elites and the harsh living and working conditions experienced by industrial workers led to the formation of labor unions, the creation of the first social welfare policies, demands for voting rights, and for some, the dream of revolutionary transformation. Those seeking a revolution were divided among numerous parties and factions. Karl Marx was a formidable theorist of revolution, as well as a major contestant for power within the diverse and contentious world of left-leaning politics. Heir to the Enlightenment's enthusiasm for reason and logic, he identified his revolutionary ideal as scientific socialism, although his adherents commonly call themselves communists. Marx believed that industrial capitalism would ultimately lead to a social order divided between a wealthy, powerful few and a mass of exploited and impoverished workers. A dictatorship of the proletariat would then abolish private property, distribute the material benefits and scientific progress achieved by the Industrial Revolution to society in general, and end poverty and injustice. Many of those committed to revolutionary change rejected Marx's insistence that revolution depended on the proletariat taking up arms. Others doubted that his imagined dictatorship of the proletariat, or indeed any government, could avoid recreating the inequality and injustice that already oppressed the poor. The Russian intellectual Mikhail Bakunin argued forcibly that peasants, displaced and unemployed artisans, and other exploited groups also had revolutionary potential, and consequently that many parts of Europe were ready for revolution. He also dismissed as naive Marx's faith in a future workers' government. Bakunin exercised a powerful influence over the development of anarchism, the chief revolutionary alternative to communism. Anarchists believed that revolution could be achieved through direct action by individuals and small groups, what they called propaganda of the deed. The result of this movement's development was a series of assassinations and bombings that shook the political structures of Europe and America. These attacks included the bombings of the Opera and Corpus Christi celebration in Spain and the Haymarket bombing in Chicago. They also included the assassinations of Tsar Alexander II of Russia, President Carnot of France, Prime Minister Cánovas del Castillo of Spain, Empress Elizabeth of Austria, King Umberto of Italy, and President William McKinley in the United States. And McKinley was killed at the 1901 Pan American Exposition, a World's Fair. The conflict between Marx and Bakunin culminated in 1872 when Bakunin and his adherents were expelled from the revolutionary organization, the International Working Men's Association. They remained a potent source of political violence and working-class mobilization in Italy, Spain, and Argentina. In the 1850s, nations fought back against trade unions, making strikes illegal and banning their organizations from forming. Now, the most influential idea of the 19th century was nationalism. French revolutionaries defined people, previously considered the subjects of a sovereign, as citizens of a nation, a concept identified with a territory, the state that ruled it, and the culture of its people. Language was usually the crucial element in creating a feeling of national unity. Living in the Austrian Empire were people who spoke German, Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, Polish, and other languages. The idea of redrawing the boundaries of states to accommodate linguistic, religious, or cultural differences was revolutionary. In Italy and Germany, it led to the forging of new states out of many small ones in 1871. In Central and Eastern Europe, nationalism threatened to break up larger states into smaller ones. In Italy in 1860, revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi and a small band of followers landed in Sicily and then in southern Italy and overthrew the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Garibaldi was sidelined, however, by a guy named Count Cavour, who expanded his northern territory into a new Kingdom of Italy. His conservative approach in the north created a moderate constitutional monarchy. The process of Italian unification illustrates the shift of nationalism from a radical democratic idea to a conservative method of building popular support for a strong centralized government, even an aristocratic and monarchical one. Some German nationalists wanted to unite all Germans under the Catholic Austrian throne. Others wanted to exclude Austria with its many non-German-speaking areas under Lutheran Prussia. The Prussian state had two advantages. One, the newly developed industries of the Rhineland, and two, the first European army to make use of railroads, telegraphs, breech-loading rifles, steel artillery, and other products of modern industry. The King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, had entrusted the running of his government to his chancellor, the brilliant authoritarian aristocrat Otto von Bismarck, who was determined to use the Prussian military and German nationalism to advance the interests of the Prussian state. In 1866, Prussia attacked and defeated Austria. To everyone's surprise, Prussia took no Austrian territory. Instead, Prussia and some smaller states formed the North German Confederation, the nucleus of a future Germany. Then, in 1870, Bismarck attacked France. In this Franco-Prussian War, German armies used their superior firepower and tactics to achieve a quick victory. The spoils of victory included a large indemnity and the two provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. By the way, Alsace and Lorraine are going to be very important later on. To the Germans, this region was German because a majority of its inhabitants spoke German. To the French, it was French because most of its inhabitants considered themselves French. These two conflicting definitions of nationalism kept enmity between France and Germany smoldering for decades. The United States was not beyond the pale of this rise for imperialism. In 1890, Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan, a lecturer in naval history and the president of the United States Naval War College, published The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 to 1783. This book is probably the most influential history book that's ever been written. The book analyzed how Britain had used a navy to conquer the world, and he encouraged the United States to invest in a strong navy so that they could be able to create an empire around the world. Mahan argued for the United States to take possession of Hawaii to be able to defend the West Coast. He also argued that the United States should build an Isthmian canal through Central America to control trading between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Well, Mahan was not just studied by the United States, but by Japan and France as well. And we'll see how Japan used that knowledge in their own respect. But let's take a look at Hawaii. Hawaii existed as its own independent kingdom, and had been an independent United Kingdom since the early 1800s. American missionaries took up residence in Hawaii in the early 1800s as well, trying to convert Hawaiian natives to Christianity. They had some limited success. The missionaries also created a written form of the Hawaiian language. In the late 1800s, there were a lot of Americans living in Hawaii, including Sanford Dole. You might have heard of Dole bananas, Dole fruit, Dole pineapples. That's the same family. They wanted to overthrow the Queen of Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani. It's not an accident they wanted to overthrow the Queen of Hawaii rather than the King of Hawaii, who had ruled before her. In 1893, they succeeded in overthrowing the Queen, and 5 years later, the United States annexed Hawaii as a territory. Also that year, 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. It all began around Havana, Cuba. There was a United States ship called the USS Maine that was anchored off the coast of Havana. It blew up. Who did it? The United States was quick to point fingers at Spain. In fact, the newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst was basically pushing for a declaration of war against Spain. Later studies have shown that the ship accidentally blew up. But that was not going to be the case in 1898. America declared war, and in quick time, I'm talking 6 months, the United States was victorious over Spain. One newspaperman called it a splendid little war. The result of which the United States got the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and a little spot off of Cuba called Guantanamo Bay. Before the war began, the Philippines had been fighting for their independence from Spain. The United States used Emiliano Aguinaldo, who had been campaigning for Filipino independence, to rally troops against the Spanish effort. In June 1898, Aguinaldo declared the Philippines independent from Spain. So when the United States took control of the Philippines, Aguinaldo and others declared independence from the US, which the United States was not about to allow. They believed that the Filipinos were basically too stupid to govern themselves, because racism. For the next 3 years, 1899 to 1902, the United States embarked on an imperialist rampage, burning villages and torturing Filipino freedom fighters. Many civilians died in what the United States termed the Filipino insurrection, as a result of the fighting, cholera and malaria epidemics, and food shortages. The United States did not grant the Philippines its independence until 1946, after World War II. But as a result of the Spanish-American War, the United States emerged as a burgeoning world power with its new overseas possessions and started on a path that would affect its role in international affairs in the next century. Now, we've got a little bit long here, so I'm going to put a pin on the United States imperialism, and in the next part of the lecture, we'll take a look at European and American dealings with China and Japan.